So thank you both for coming. Thank you, Jay, for making this film. Thanks, Andrew Weil, for appearing here, being in the film. So I just want to ask a couple questions. I want to open it up to the audience, if we could. So Gay, so as Michael mentioned in the introduction, you are not a baby boomer.
Tail end.
So that gives you a different kind of perspective. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to this project? And what did you know about Leary and Ram Dass before you made it, if anything?
Okay, lots of answers. One answer, many layers of reality there. Can you hear okay? How's that? Okay, better, thank you. I like feedback. Yes, I was born in '65, so I met him once and Ram Dass once. I mean, what started fairly spontaneously as a conversation about when Tim announced he was dying, and we said, what could we do? And we decided to put these two together in a dialogue. So, but what interested me was a different doorway. It was I'd say the death doorway. And sort of in a cosmic irony, I really truly believe that death and our hope for the future, if we embrace death, we actually have a more hopeful future. But I lost a brother when I was 17, so death helped me kind of come to my knees and start waking up a little earlier in my life than I might have otherwise. And yeah, the spontaneous moment of putting these two guys together, clearly this is 1995, so I've been at it a while. Put it down for a lot of years, but it kept haunting me because I felt, what is it in this material, in this story that's so important? And it was really important. And I felt connected to both these men and their stories and their perspectives. And they were very different from one another. I feel it's a little autobiographical, I'd say. I'm a little Ram Dass, a little Leary, if you will. You know, I've done a lot of environmental work, nuclear work, climate change, and the more I meditated on why we're not doing anything about it is really that we are not, as a culture, sitting in the cycle of nature, which is life and death. I just want to say, I got back from Panama a few days ago, and I got to go to the rainforest and the jungle, and there was a moment where I realized, this is ecstasy and agony, because I was literally in tears with the diversity of life and seeing how life emerges from death. It's just in front of you. And it's so beautiful and so integrated and so connected. And then I went and swam quite a bit back and forth down the coast. And I hadn't, doing my own little survey. There was so much bleaching at the coral. It was just so sad. So the ecstasy being the life and how we're all deeply integrated with life and death, and then seeing the big death. So I take a real personal, somehow affront to, we are taking the planet through a particular death. I don't want to be a bummer. But also death is beautiful, and it's a rites of passage. It helps us live more fully. And I think that we have a moment in time here to wake up and make a difference. And it's both very personal and very collective. And so this story for me was my human scale entry to sharing with people how I felt about this moment in time. And I really appreciate Andy, Dr. Weil, being here, because we go back too. But let's cover that later. Sorry, that was a long answer.
So you have such an amazing cast in the film, including Andrew. So how did you two connect? Like, what is your history, and how did you get him into the film?
Can I start with a little compliment, and then I'll hand it out? Well, I want to just say this man is obviously a visionary, and my husband and I videotaped and did some work with you, the video news story back in mid-90s also. And back then you were saying, hey, hydrogenated fats, trans fats are going to be illegal one day. These things are bad. And now here we are, right? And we also helped co-produce the two first PBS shows, Spontaneous Healing and 8 Weeks to Optimum Health. So that was mid-90s, and been a real fan ever since. And it took me a while to come back and interview you. I mean, I think it was after you'd had more time with Ram Dass, and said, yeah, now's the time. Let's get the story.
And you said you did not know of my history with them.
No, that's weird. Yeah, when I was doing these shows in the mid-'90s with him, I had no idea of their history.
So Andrew, so you studied with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass at Harvard.
I did not study
You just
with
Sorry, our high-tech version here. We
Okay.
Just put that on right there.
No way.
It's all connected. All connected.
No, I did not study with them. I knew them. I was studying botany at Harvard and was interested in psychoactive plants. And I heard that this research was going on with psilocybin, and I wanted to take it myself and wanted to try those things. And I went over and met Leary, and and I had met Dick Alpert. So my first interest was just wanting to be part of that research, which they said they couldn't use undergraduates. But Leary gave me this little clue, which led me to figure out how to get mescaline. That was back in 1960, I think, 61. And then I joined the Harvard Crimson as a reporter, and as I said in that, I became the investigative reporter that got on the trail of that, and then I was known for a long time as the guy that got Leary kicked out of Harvard. Leary was never kicked out of Harvard. He was never fired. He left on his own, and the university let his contract run out. But Alpert was fired, and that was the result of the stories that I wrote. So, that was an interesting thing to live with and history to live with. And with Leary, it was fairly easy for me to reestablish a connection with him afterwards. With Ram Dass, it took a long time. And, finally, I had some very intense time with him on Maui about 3 years ago. We'd been in touch over the years. I did a fundraiser for him in Santa Fe after he'd had his stroke. So we had tentatively, healed our relationship. But finally, in meeting with him 3 years ago, we spent some very intense time together. And he finally said, you did me a mitzvah, a blessing, a good deed. Because, in fact, if he had stayed at Harvard, he would have been destroyed. And there was absolutely no way that he could have survived in that very rigid, structured academic environment, and he didn't belong there, and he wouldn't have left on his own. And the explosion that resulted from that, including a front-page story in the New York Times, was really what disseminated awareness of psychedelics throughout the culture and the world, and also launched him on this career, to the person he is today.
So did that article actually sort of haunt you in terms of the kind of fracture in the relationship that it created?
Well, it was this. I think I don't remember exactly what I said in the film, but in an odd way, he was a teacher to me in a strange way, as an example of what would happen to me if I didn't change my ways. Because at that, back then, I thought that an academic career, and having a position at Harvard was what I wanted. And if I had persisted in that path, I would have been destroyed and would not have done what I have been able to do since. But by watching his example out there, he did things in a sort of edgier, bigger way than I did, and I didn't have to do them in that extreme form as a result of seeing his example.
And so Timothy Leary obviously had a reputation of being kind of a well-documented wild man.
Uh-huh.
So that was true from your experience, and you experienced that firsthand.
I think I also said in this, he had a twinkle in his eye. He was a kind of Pied Piper character. He was an innocent sort of, an Irish storyteller, and he charmed people. He also had a really bad boy streak in him. He liked to piss people off, and he just could not avoid doing that. And he had an incredible knack for saying exactly the thing that would push people's buttons in the worst way, and he just could not refrain from doing that. And it got him in a lot of trouble.
And Dr. Weil, I just want to ask you one more thing. So could you talk, you touch on it in the film, but could you talk about how Leary and Ram Dass actually influenced your work in integrative medicine? Because I'm just really curious, because it seems like you're sort of in a different career?
Well, one of the things they were they did serious academic work in 1960, 61, 62, before all the stuff got really bad with the university, and they were in their early experiments with psilocybin were, I think, the first people to demonstrate that the effects of a drug are not just due to the drug. They're a combination of drug set and setting, that is, the pharmacological effect of the drug interacting with the expectations of the person and the environment in which the drug is taken. And those three factors are equally important in shaping a drug experience. And I think this is a lesson that it's been very difficult that very much influenced me and my thought about medical treatments and responses to them. But there was very interesting research that was done in the early around that same time, a lot of it at Maryland State Psychiatric Hospital, using LSD with terminal cancer patients, and incredibly positive outcomes. They would have several sessions with a therapist to prepare the dying person for an LSD experience, and there was a guided LSD experience, and then several sessions of follow-up. And the outcomes were terrific, that people lost pain, they didn't require pain medication, they were able to interact productively with their families for the first time, to deal openly with the subject of death, and to accept death and die peacefully. Other researchers who did not understand this drug set and setting interaction thought that the magic was in the drug. So without any understanding of how to shape the experience, they would give LSD to subjects, and they didn't get the same results. And that was one of the things that turned people off from trying to use these agents. So I think that was something that Albert and Leary, I think, really have to be credited for demonstrating that. And I've applied that to many things in my own life, and certainly in working with patients. I think expectation of both doctor and patient often is as important or more important than what's actually done in the name of treatment. It shapes treatment. By the way, we are currently finally seeing a renaissance of research on psychedelics. And actually, there's been, I think, more positive publicity about psychedelics in the past few years than there has been about marijuana. Quite remarkably. A lot of it in women's magazines, interestingly enough. And women are the thought leaders in our culture, so I think that's significant. But there is quite a lot of interesting research, including finally, after 50 years, a resumption of some of this work with terminal cancer patients and using psychedelics. And I think there's just tremendous potential in medicine for these things. So maybe finally, after all this cycle that we've been through, maybe we're at the beginnings of the end of the drug wars and the whole drug establishment and all that. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And did you? I was curious, did you experience a lot of controversy early on when you were doing work with psychedelics?
Well, I did. I did the first human experiments with marijuana, and I got a lot of stuff for that because it was not what people wanted to hear in those days. It said that we showed that marijuana was a relatively mild drug and so forth. But you should be careful of my predictions, because after I did that, I predicted that marijuana would be legalized within 5 years, because I thought it was just a matter of presenting truthful information to people. And boy, was I wrong.
No, you were just a little ahead of it.
Yeah, well, quite a number of years ahead of it. Anyway, it's now finally happening.
Well, just like trans fats.
Yeah.
Once 20 years.
Also, I still get, I've been fairly open about my own experiences with psychedelics and other drugs. I've written about them and talk about them. And over the years, people have tried to embarrass me about them. 60 Minutes did a profile of me some years ago, and it was, the focus was supposed to be on medicine and integrative medicine and health and healing. And in the course of, of 3 days of interviews, I told this story about how I had lost a lifelong allergy to cats during an LSD experience when I was 28. I took LSD with friends. I was really happy, felt great on a spring day, and A cat jumped into my lap. I used to get hives if a cat licked me in my, sneezing and itching eyes. So I always avoided them. And the cat jumped into my lap, and I had a moment of like this, and then I thought, this is silly. I feel so great. So I began playing with the cat and petting it. Instant disappearance of allergies. Never have had a reaction since. So that stuff really interests me. Anyway, in the 60 Minutes show, they issued a press release the day before the show was to air saying, integrative medicine doctor takes LSD to, lose cat allergies. That was the thing that they picked. So, yes, I have dealt with that a lot.
I would have just,
And wait till I open the Weil allergy clinic. Then I'll show them. Yes.
So do you think it's useful to make a distinction between saying a drug or a sacred medicine? Because you just talked about it as a medicine.
Yeah, obviously these terms are very loaded, and I like psychedelic. There are a lot of people like entheogen, which just means creating God within. That I don't know. That seems a little artificial to me. I don't like hallucinogen. That sounds psychiatric and pathological. I think psychedelic works just fine. Mind bending is not the correct term.
So I'm curious for both of you, do you feel like the kind of political demonizing of Timothy Leary that went on actually helped his cause? Because it sort of turned him into sort of a cultural martyr, right?
Well, he was a true political prisoner, first of all. And what would you say, Gay?
Well, I had some new thinking on it by reading some perspectives recently, and of course knowing him. But this medicine, drug, whatever you want to call it, has been so suppressed throughout history for reasons of you don't want to give the real power up.
Yeah.
And in a strange way, Leary, even though many of these scientists all blame him for having shut down the research for 35 years. And, I always said, well, how could one person do that for one thing? Scapegoating is a very dangerous thing, which we all collectively did with him. But on another level, in some ways, he almost ensured, because he helped promote it so much in the 60s. The government estimates 28 million just with LSD had partaken. And so in some ways, in the short run, yes, he was demonized and blamed, but in the long run, it will ensure that this will not stay underground. There's too much, the veil has been parted too far, and we're not going to go back. And we know there's a truth, and so we can thank him. I just think the whole story hadn't been kind of completely seen. And I didn't set out to glorify or demonize or do anything. Because I didn't live through it. I truly saw these two beautiful, interesting characters, intelligent, humorous, but also have fallen. It's a cautionary tale. But part of this film, for me, the journey was reconciling these caricatures that my media culture had handed me with these real men and the real history I was uncovering through the archives. And I had to reconcile that. And I felt like we had to reconcile that. There's a lot still to uncover from that period, because we keep reliving the same mistakes.
I just want to ask you one more question before we open it up. I was curious about Robert Redford narrating the film. So I know that you worked with him early in your career, correct? Is that sort of how you got him involved? Or did he drop acid? I'm just curious. I'm really curious.
Really, that's not mine to say. I will just say that I was really, really fortunate, because it seemed to be in his wheelhouse. And he was so generous with his time. So more than narrating, okay, so I saw him at his wife's art opening, and yes, I had a little bit of history with him, but I just basically said, would you watch my little rough cut, like 1,000 other people asked him to do? And he said he would, and he did. He and his wife, he called me the next morning. This is great, I love it. I didn't even talk for 15 minutes. He really understood the film. And I had not planned to ask him to narrate. I started complaining that Susan Sarandon had not called me back. And I thought he needed a female voice, whatever. And he says, and I said, what do you think? Because I said, God, he's got a great voice. What do you think about narrating it? And he said he would be honored. But more than narrating, he sat with me. We had a few phone calls, and then he sat with me in my little editing studio for 4.5 hours. We went through the whole thing, the final cut. and story structure. He used to give me some nice, gracious advice, never ever telling me, I'd have to sit on it and sleep on it and digest it. And what did he mean? And then I go, oh yeah, okay. So he gave me more story guidance even than the narration, I would say, in terms of. So no, he's a radical, beautiful person, and more than I realized. And I'm not going to speak to his history, but I'm eternally grateful to him for his guidance.
Yeah. And I think some people forget he's a great filmmaker. I mean, he's made a lot of really wonderful films, so that's great advice, yeah. So can we open it up to some people in the audience? Yeah, how about right here, please?
Dr. Weil, you are, is there a mic, or should I just shout?
You have a,
Dr. Weil, you're ahead of the curve. You anticipated my question about your cat allergy. And since that's kind of an old anecdote, I wonder if you have come across other people's anecdotes of getting cured from something
yeah, many,
objective, physical.
Many, and what my interest is when these drugs do become medically available. I am not that interested in using them for psychological effects, for mental health. I mean, that's fine, but I'm really fascinated by their potential to change chronic physical diseases, because I've seen so many examples in myself and in others. I have a friend who had a severe rheumatoid arthritis, who has had a total remission originating instantaneously in an experience with MDMA, in which he had some feeling unity with the cosmos, and literally the disease disappeared since then. I've put him in touch with other patients with rheumatoid arthritis, and he's tried to guide them with trips. Doesn't always work, but the possibility is there. And my sense is that these drugs can give you an experience, it can be momentary, of being free of some chronic pattern that the body is held on to. And just to see that that's possible can often increase the chance of finding ways to make that last. And I think that's incredibly valuable. And I think it's applicable to all sorts of medical conditions. So that's the kind of thing that I would love to be able to work with. And again, it's the drug set and setting. I mean, the patient has to be prepared properly. The experience has to be structured properly. It's not just a matter of giving somebody, a psychedelic and having this happen. And I've also read a lot of reports, and it's all different ones. Whether it's ayahuasca or LSD or mushrooms, these things happen. And that would be great to systematically collect these kinds of cases and learn from them and figure out how to make them happen more often.
Great. Any questions from over here? And I'll repeat the question so you can hear it, so you don't have to scream. If you want to.
I'm a hospice nurse. I've been in hospice for over 18 years now. I'd like to hear your perspective on the use of pain medication versus the use of alternative medications, because I have a lot of patients that have narcotic prescribed. However, they supplement with a lot of marijuana use. However, I've not ever seen anybody try alternative methods, and I've seen some beautiful deaths and experienced some beautiful deaths with my patients, and some not so beautiful deaths. So I came here dying to know with a different expectation, and I would just like to hear your perspective, Dr. Weil, and how does that, would that affect the dying process?
Okay, first, the question, she's a hospice nurse and wonders about the potential for use of these things in dying patients, and also about the problems of using pain medication in dying patients. And this is first of all, let me say, I think that the growth of the hospice movement in this country is one of the best things that's happened. And it's one of the first things that has at least started the process of bringing death out into the open and allowing us to talk about it. I think there are limitations to the hospice model in that I don't think it properly addresses spirituality or the spiritual aspects of dying. I don't think it's equipped to do that. But it is a huge step over the medicalization of death that takes place in hospitals, which is awful. Now, one of the problems, a common problem in dying people is pain management. And a problem with the drugs that we have for that, which are derived from opioid drugs, is that they cloud consciousness so that they don't allow for full consciousness and awareness. And it seems to me that, if you listen to these people and other people and Buddhist teachers, you want to be maximally aware as you're dying. But you don't want to be so distracted by pain, right? So now, a very good friend of mine, who was a former student of mine, works at Casa de la Luz Hospice here. And he says that he has learned that there is a real art to using opioids. And that if you get the formula right, you can get pain control without clouding consciousness. So that's the first thing. It may be possible to do that, and it may be that in the, in day-to-day routine use of these drugs, people aren't using them artfully and they're using too high doses and not doing it right. But the experience that came out from those early experiments with LSD and terminal cancer patients, and what's been happening now as well, suggests that it is possible to change people's perspective on pain. And I think this can be done through hypnosis, it can be done through mindfulness meditation, it can be done through a guided psychedelic experience, and make the need for opioids much, much less, which is probably desirable. Now with marijuana, I don't know. There is one of the useful effects of cannabis is that the cannabinoid receptors that we have, they interact synergistically with opioids, so that using marijuana, you can get by with lower doses of opioids and get the same analgesic effect. So that's one of the desirable qualities of using medical cannabis in people with pain. So I think there's a lot of possibilities here. One of the problems with cannabis at the moment, and it's the big roadblock is that the federal government will not take that drug out of Schedule 1, which is declared to have no therapeutic use and high potential for abuse. And so any hospice that receives Medicare funds, you can't even have a conversation about marijuana. It's completely off limits. It's nuts. So until that changes, and that's not going to change at least till after the election, and God knows what's going to happen there. But if that's what has to happen. Once the federal government moves marijuana out of Schedule 1, that'll open up a whole lot more possibilities for being able to use it in a lot of situations.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay.
How about putting the lights up so we get to see everybody, since this is a conversation with...
Well, this is about the extent of the lighting situation. So, I just want to be honest about that. So maybe we should go by quadrant to be fair. So maybe like back over here, since we were over here. Is there a question over here? Yeah, how about in the dark shirt? Yes. Yeah.
Hey, Doc, I was wondering, it sounds like you are for the legalization of psychedelics for medical use, but not beyond that, or could you?
No, I'm for the removal of criminal penalties for everything. It is not. The criminal law is not an appropriate mechanism for trying to regulate drug consumption. I think the only legitimate way of trying to do that is through education. And that all of our efforts to get people to stop taking drugs we don't like by imposing criminal penalties has backfired horribly. It's increased use, it's led people to use worse forms of drugs in worse ways. I think that that everything should be out there, and that you work to really use experiment with various kinds of social controls, taxation. There are all sorts of ways that you can try to affect drug-taking behavior for the better. And part of that means being honest about the drugs that we like and make money from, which are in many cases worse, much worse medically than certainly than the psychedelics and cannabis. But I would apply that to all drugs, and I think that what I'd like to see is a gradual. I don't think we can do it overnight. I think a gradual dismantling of this whole superstructure of criminal law that has been built up, which just doesn't work. That all has to be taken apart and go away. At the same time, working to find other ways of influencing people to use drugs in healthier ways.
That's such a good idea, by the way. I don't know, it just seems so simple when you say it. But it's not. How about in the middle, since we're moving quadrant by quadrant? Yeah, how about here?
You took drugs, and Andy Weil became Dr. Weil. Richard Alpert took drugs, became Ram Dass. What happened with that other botanist, Michael Weiner, who's probably better known as Michael Savage? Do you have any idea why he...
No.
What happens to people that don't get more open because they take drugs and they go off to the right wing side? Does that make sense? Does the question
Yeah.
make sense?
So the question is, what happens?
It's drug set and setting. The magic is not in the drug.
Well, prior to the 60s, there was a lot of heavy military use of these, trying to use as mind control, and it was nasty. So, yeah, I mean, the opposite is true. You can use it for all the what I would call the wrong purposes. And it amplifies wherever you are. So, it's not for everybody. It's very powerful. It used to be the shaman class. I mean, I know that Leary went back and forth between the philosophy that Aldous Huxley had, which is this is not for everybody. It's really, intellectuals are, be prepared. And Allen Ginsberg was democratize. It's for everybody. And, you have to be prepared, licensed, understand what you're doing. And there are... I don't think the same kind of casualties in other types of drugs, but there's, you can see a little too much for that moment in your life. But there hasn't been the casualties with these psychedelics that there has been with really any other class of heavy narcotics.
That's a good point. So how about over here, since we're going to ask from this side of the room?
Can I ask a quick question? How many people here are under the age of 35? Could you raise your hands? Good, all right. Okay, well, that's good. Because, a lot of young people don't do a lot of theater going anymore in terms of dropping into theater going. It seems like maybe this is not. Can we ask somebody that's like under 35?
Yeah.
You are. That guy with his hand way up.
Young guy with hand up. What?
Yes, please, guy there.
Yeah, this question is directed to both of you. In your discussions with both Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, do you know if their perceptions and perspective about psychedelics have changed over the years? How they viewed it back when they first started versus how they viewed it more recently?
So did everyone hear that? How did their positions on psychedelics change over the years?
Well, I think Ram Dass came to feel that they weren't necessary. For himself, right. Leary, back then thought that everybody should take them like candy, and thought that, and I think he, despite what he had shown academically, he sort of slipped into the idea that the magic was in the drug, and that if you put LSD in the water supply, you'd have a nation of enlightened people, and that is not what would happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, I watched him just knowing him at the end of his life and looking through the archives that he started off pretty conservative, trying to play the game, trying to license, trying to do all that. And the further that he got pushed out, the further he went out. It was kind of one of these. And you're right, he did get, there was that period. I don't think at the end of his life he was in the everybody should take it mode. But as a matter of fact, with Zach, he was much more
conservative. Right.
But yeah, Ram Dass, that Alan Watts comment, if you get the phone call and you get the message, you can hang up. I mean, it's not something that you have to keep doing. If the veil parts and you see, it's not. I mean, that's why it's not a.
I have a friend now who has for the past several years been taking ayahuasca every other day.
Oh my God!
I mean, I can't imagine that. He was at my house over the holidays, and I said, are you still taking it that frequently? And he said, yes, was described. He said, you know, I guess I'm addicted.
Wow.
Well, there you go. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine taking a drug like that or a medicine like that at that frequency.
Right.
I just makes no sense to me.
Right, so I guess there's always that possibility.
I mean, he you know, can clothe and feed himself.
Have you thought of studying him? That's good. He sounds like an interesting guy. How about over here? We have no questions from over here in this area. Are there any questions? How about here? Please, in the black. Yeah. Sir, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up with these guys and enjoyed it all. Spent a month and a half in India in pursuit of the spiritual path. So the question is, with these crazy politics and the difficult financials, how can we integrate the wisdom of the awareness and the love and the connectedness they talk about in living today?
Oh, brother.
Yes. How do we integrate the wisdom that they spoke of in the crazy political climate that we are currently living in? That's an easy question. Super easy.
All right, my personal view is that all you can do is work on yourself. And that if you expand your awareness and change your awareness, you influence the people you come into contact with. And I think that's all you can do. And if enough of us do it, there will be a change that'll spread throughout society. I still believe that.
On anybody else.
Absolutely not, right,
Just
yeah.
can't.
And there is a real amplification of the fear right now. So the only way we can deal with it is to try to open and not react with more fear. And it sounds trite, but love truly is the practice in a way, and it's the only way to embrace what's going on now. I mean, Ram Dass, I realized when I was interviewing him over the years, he had George Bush on his altar behind him.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, if you can't love George Bush, who can? You know, he's got to love George Bush. And then it changed back to Obama, and then it changed, like, whoever's president, you have him on your altar, and you just love that. Embrace that. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. I'm not sure that was a full answer. We're still answering that. You all are answering that.
It's an answer in progress. Okay. So I'm talking about
Vote. That's the answer. Vote. Get deep in yourself and go to the polls.
Yes. And stop laughing at Donald Trump because he's not funny. Like, it's not funny. He's scary. So we have time for a couple more questions. So how about over here in the red?
Talk a little bit about set and setting.
We can talk about set and set.
Okay, these are terms that were proposed by psychologists, and I said set is a person's expectations of what will happen when a drug is taken. And it's not necessarily conscious expectations. You know, if you ask a person, what do you think is going to happen to you? What they say may be different from what unconsciously on a deep level they believe. And setting is the environment in which a drug is taken. I mean, on a very crude level, if you take LSD for the first time in a beautiful outdoor meadow, when you are feeling, you know, terrific in the company of people you feel safe with, you know, you increase the probability of having, and you take a reasonable dose of it, the chances are that you will have a positive experience. If you take a massive overdose of LSD in a New York subway on a day when you're feeling anxious and paranoid, the chances are very high that you're going to have a bad trip. So, you know, that's, I say, very crude examples, but
That's brilliant.
but you know that many people who use these things don't really pay attention to those factors and realize that the combined effects of set and setting can actually completely reverse the pharmacological effect of a drug. You can arrange set and setting so that a dose of a stimulant like an amphetamine will cause a person to fall asleep. You can arrange conditions of set and setting so that a dose of a sedative drug will cause a person to be excited and you know, run and jump. So, you know, and I think that people that are, you know, lean towards materialistic philosophy and this includes pharmacologists and many physicians, really it's very hard for them to get away from the idea that it's the pharmacology that is the most important variable there. And especially with these drugs and with cannabis, with psychedelics, the influence of the non-pharmacological variables is really, really important.
Exactly, why it's a weapon and a medicine. I mean,
Yep.
being used for mind control by the military, and it's a healing medicine. I mean, how many substances can claim those extremes? So.
Okay, one more question from over on this side of the room. How about right there?
Yeah,
With the
so
black wall.
there was a little bit in the movie, tip of the hat to Leary's late in life interaction with cyberculture. What do you think of the manifestation, or the ultimate manifestation of setting being the drug in combination with virtual reality?
Interesting.
Drugs and VR. That's a good one.
Well, I think we're going to live to see that. That's clearly coming. I won't make any predictions there, but that's something we're going to get to experience.
Therefore, the more conscious we are as we develop these technologies, the better.
So we're going to have to
And
wrap
I
up.
want to say that my good friend over here introduced something to me when I was a younger person about media fasts. And I have taken that in various increments over time, days, weeks, months, to just disengage yourself from the screens, from the noise, to go within. We have very few opportunities to go within in this high clutter environment that we're in. And so media fasting, where you stay away from the screens and even the newspapers, and just disengage and see how you feel for a while. But don't stay disengaged, don't vote.
Well, and the Ram Dass philosophy about being here now certainly has implications for technology use now, live in the moment.
In the end, that actually is the biggest message I got out of this movie. Is that is the hardest thing and the most important thing, is to be here now. And if I was to mash up with you guys in terms of their philosophies, I'd say, think for yourself with unconditional love and be here now. Or be here now and think for yourself with unconditional love.
That's a nice big word. Yeah. So I just wanted to wrap up by asking you, Dave, so this is a great film, and I love how this film is being distributed because you're doing it yourself. Which is kind of great. You're sort of taking it across the country. Could you sort of just tell us what is next for the film? Like, what is the plan for the film?
Well, I'm clearly not in a big hurry. It's taken me 20 years to do this. And my mother just had this stack of stuff when I went home to visit her. I was writing papers about this when I was 19 or 20. So the good news is I think it's a timeless story. But I am learning the business and art of distribution. Because things have changed. Every 6 months, things are changing. And I was just talking to Andy about, this is our modern campfire. Stories and filmmaking can be our modern form of shamanism and healing if done well. And very few, we don't get that collective opportunity very much anymore. We're in our living rooms, we're on our screens, watching it by ourselves or with a few people. And when we get to come out, so I'm kind of really fascinated with having more group conversations about these subjects, because this is how we inform each other. And so this, we've done Northern California, some of Oregon, New Mexico. I'm slowly kind of inching my way out into the world. I do have a couple of proposals from distributors to see who I can work with in a way where you don't use the old model where you just kind of hand it over to them, because they're not going to treat it the way the filmmaker will. And so many filmmakers, either something gets put on the shelf, or they, I guess I care too much, and it feels like it's really a vehicle to have deeper conversations. This all started as a conversation. We're trying to continue the conversation. And right now it's not available on DVD, because if you do that, then the theaters, as you know, the theaters don't want to have you. So, but our website, you'll know exactly when it's available via other ways, either streaming or DVDs, or ways in which you can bring it to a group, a church, a school, or whatever. So it's dyingtoknowmovie.com, and we very quickly soon will hopefully have more opportunities. But I didn't want to give up this moment where every time I go into a community, it's less about me. I try to find who in that community has interesting things to say about these topics, death, drugs, and invite them in to facilitate and have the conversations. So that's been working really well.
Yeah.
And so we're headed to to Minneapolis. If you guys know people there, we want to really have some good conversations in Minneapolis.
Well, and Tucson's a much cooler city
Oh,
than most,
very
of course.
cool.
But this is an
really hot,
indication
actually.
that people are very interested, so I really hope to get it out there. And I wanted to point out that Gay is going to be here tomorrow night.
And Monday with Peggy
Peggy
Hitchcock,
Hitchcock will be
who's in the
Monday.
film. Peggy Mellon Hitchcock.
Yes, so come back.
Q&A. Keep
Yeah.
telling your friends. Okay, so the thing about self-distribution, it relies on word of mouth. There are no big advertising, no big, it's very hard. So we rely, if it means something to you and you care about what you saw and you want somebody else to see it, tell them like sooner rather than later, because we're not sure how long we're going to be here.
Yep.
So,
I want to thank Andrew Weil. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave Gillen. Thank you all for coming. And then the movies are playing here all week. I just want to point out, so if you want to see it.
2 shows a day, 5
2 shows a day, come back.
Come back.
Sometime. Bring a
Thank
friend.
you all very, very much.